So welcome back to Australia.
Very good to be back.
So, well, with the Hateful Eight, one of the things that is really quite unique about it is kind of the 70mm and having the overture and the intermission and, you know, getting a program if you do see it in that 70mm. Do you think that part of the future of cinema is maybe to create these kind of experiences to differentiate it from, you know, television or watching something on your smartphone?
Well, I personally, I love that kind of stuff, and I was kind of curious to see if people would be taken with it as much as I am. I do like the idea, in the case of this movie, of making it an event to some degree or another. You know, especially if you go see the 70mm version of the movie, with the intermission of the program and all that, it's like that's what you're doing that night. It's an event. You know, there's all kinds of other movies, you can do other things, but if you go to that version, you're mine. And you know that, and you want to be mine, and you're giving yourself to that experience. And I literally couldn't be happier, especially in today's day and age, to be able to do this in 70mm, to actually get as many theaters that are showing it in 70mm, and actually have audiences have that response, have that experience. I watched online. There's a little documentary that the boys in Melbourne have put together about how they got their 70mm projectors together to show The Hateful Eight. And I actually wept when I saw it. And I mean, they seem like such lovely people, and the fact that they would do that for my movie, and you see them digging in the garage for parts and stuff, and it actually made me weep that it was they were getting so on board about what I was trying to do.
You've said in the past about your support of Australian films, and I was wondering if you could maybe kind of reel off your top 3 Australian films and what you like about Australian storytelling.
Well, you know, it's funny because, I mean, oddly enough, in a weird way, I think a lot of people have said, and I guess I've said it too, that from my influences in films growing up, I've kind of have almost 2 parents, and that's usually foreign art cinema and exploitation movies. And then I've always been trying to meld the 2 together for the majority of my career. And I guess one of the things that I always really responded to in Australian cinema is they seem to be made up of the same 2 parents. Because you know, whenever the Australian genre flicks, whenever the exploitation movies played in America, they were never advertised as Australianism. In fact, they tried to ignore that as much as possible. And so, like stuff like Patrick or Mad Max or Road Warrior and Road Games and all those movies came out. They were what they were. However, I also lived through that big explosion of Australian cinema in the late 70s, early 80s. That was like My Brilliant Career and The Last Wave and The Getting of Wisdom and Breaker Morant. And there was just something really evocative about those movies. And even at the video store that I worked at, Video Archives, we had a big giant foreign section that was broken down into different countries. And our Australian section was one of the most populated in the 80s because people really, really liked the Australian movies. And they got to know who the actors were, and so Careful He Might Hear You would run a bunch of times because people saw something with John Hargreaves or saw something with Wendy Hughes and they wanted to see more. And so I guess that's one of the things that I like is the 2 dichotomies that exist, but nevertheless, the same actors move back and forth between the different movies. Okay, so I'll say 3 of my favorite Australian movies, and I'm just going to pick them off the top of my head rather than try to get too specific about them, would probably be Richard Franklin's Road Games, George Miller's first Mad Max, and then there's a 3rd movie that I'm a real big fan of called Next of Kin, that stars John Jarratt, and it literally is a horror film quite unlike any other. I talked to John Jarratt about it because that director never did another movie. And I think they were maybe an industrial filmmaker that was able to kind of put a movie together. And I barely kind of remember the story, frankly, to tell you the truth. Right? I mean, it focuses on a young woman, and John Jarratt is her boyfriend in it. But the tone I remember is it has a very, very unique tone. And the closest equivalent to this tone is The Shining. And there's no movie that really feels like The Shining, with the possible exception of this movie, Next of Kin. And it doesn't try to take anything from it. They share no other similarities. But there is this mesmerizing tone of dread that's in the film that I think is truly unique to it, and it's very, very evocative. It maybe falls apart a little bit at the very, very end, but that tone that it carries through is really it's truly unique to itself, and I think that's a real terrific thing. In the case of, Mad Max, I don't really need to talk about because we all know about Mad Max. But in the case of Road Games, even though he was an American, I think Everett de Roche is the best of the Australian film screenwriters. He is your Cornell Woolrich. He was your Elmore Leonard. He was your Hitchcock to some degree or another, even more than maybe, say, Richard Franklin, who I love and adore. He wrote some really, really terrific scripts, and I actually think Road Games is, hands down, his best script. I think you could remake it tomorrow, and there's actually no reason to remake it, but except for the fact that the script is so good. So don't change the script. Don't have somebody rewrite it. Just use that script and put Russell Crowe in the quid role. That would be really terrific. But also, I'm a huge fan of Richard Franklin, and I think that's him at his Hitchcockian best. I think that's a truly magnificent thriller.
You mentioned Mad Max, and of course, no explanation needed. I'm wondering with Fury Road if you think that it retained any of its kind of car-exploitation elements.
I think Fury Road is the most amazing movie I've seen this year. And it took me a while to see it. I was kind of against the idea for a while. For one reason, and one reason only, is that Mel Gibson, in a world where Mel Gibson exists, how is he not playing Mad Max? And so I didn't want to see the movie. I rejected the film. I was on Facebook, and I had all these friends of mine that kept saying, "Quentin, you've got to see it. It's amazing." And I don't want to see it. Any more than if John Carpenter decided to do another Snake Plissken movie, but decided that he wanted to do it with Gerard Butler instead. I'm just not interested. And then I saw it. And I actually ended up getting a print of it. And I watched the print at my house, and I ended up watching it 3 times in the course of the weekend because I thought it was so terrific. And I actually think Tom Hardy did a very good job. I was very happy with him. Now, the fact that it's more Charlize's movie went a long way, as far as I'm concerned. I still think the movie would have been better with Mel Gibson because, again, part of my problem with the idea of I had a problem with the fact that Mad Max wasn't Australian, all right? But part of the reason that I had such a reaction to it wasn't anything against Tom Hardy. It was about the potentials of the material. Mel Gibson? That's the kind of guy I can imagine has lived in this effed up wasteland for the last 30 years. I can imagine Mad Mel having existed through these last 30 years in this world, and now here he is. I can see that. And so, to me, that was such rich dramatic possibilities to not explore it. It's like, okay, well, now what are we watching? Another truck convoy chase? Well, and the answer is yes, that is what we're watching. But it was just actually so amazing, and the world that he created was so terrific that I didn't hold it against it, and I was actually really taken with it. But it took me a while to see it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today.
Oh, my pleasure.
And I have to say, I think that Furiosa is one of the great on-screen warriors, along with The Bride.
I agree with you. And and I actually have, I'm going to throw this out there for the world, and you guys, your fans can argue about it or not. I really did like Tom Hardy in the film. I actually thought he did a really good job. His thumbs up, actually, that little moment really kind of made it for me. However, and this is my opinion, and I'm throwing it out there, I would have liked it much, much better if he was not Max Rudkowski. I would have liked it better if he was the feral child having grown up. All my problems would be solved if he was the feral child grown up.
As the internet explodes with discussion. Well, thank you.